Um, when it's like how we come up with these, like what we're going to teach at the satsang. He's like ready to send out the newsletter. And he's like, what are you going to talk about? And I take about 5 minutes and I try to think of some topic that I think is relevant to what's happening either around me or what I'm seeing. And I thought about, this term darshan. And darshan in the yoga tradition it has a long history of what's called guru darshan, where a teacher like looks at a student and they make contact with each other, eye contact, and there's this kind of mystical transfer of energy that happens, and that was the first time I'd ever heard of this word darshan. But then darshan is also kind of, when you look at other, from Indian tradition, when people talk about darshan, there's also just kind of like seeing the other and removing the otherness by actually viewing and finding compassion for that being. So there's not that kind of, it's not really that kind of weird mystical transfer of energy. It's about seeing. And I've been, with everything that's been going on, with the virus, with people's anxiety levels, with people's fears, with the Black Lives Matter movements and the protests and the counter energy, there is a lack of darshan going on. And I'm seeing that both on the far right and the far left, that there's kind of this inability to see the other. And I wanted to talk about this idea of, if you're a yoga practitioner and you've taken on this tradition, like how in the world do you actually start to give or receive darshan in the world we're living in? And darshan, this idea of seeing, it sounds like an incredibly external sensory idea, right? I'm using my eyes and I'm looking, and in yoga tradition, the first step of meditation is bring your senses inward, close your eyes and come inward. And I started doing some research on the concept of darshan. And when I started looking at scriptures, and one of the things that I noticed is in the Mahabharata, Gadhara is married to a blind king. He's physically blind. But some people say that because of a protest that she's being married to kind of half a man or a man with a handicap, she decides to put on a mask and take away her own sight, so that she's not superior to her husband physically, that they become on the same level. But, she's the mother of the Kauravas, who are kind of seen as, the bad guys in the story. And part of the problem with the relationship that the Kaurava children have with their mother is their mother doesn't look at them. She doesn't give them darshan. She hears what they're saying, but she doesn't look at them. She actually doesn't see how rotten they are. And that becomes part of the subplot of the story that leads to this big epic war, is that the mother isn't really looking, nor is the father, because he's legally blind, at the children and their actions. So they're always kind of like making excuses for their children. So that was a very interesting idea of darshan, and not darshan, and darshan in the same kind of way, that you're not really truly looking at the person. you're avoiding looking at them. We also have like places in scripture where there's conflict and nobody is willing to kind of stop and like look, but is just purely looking darshan. And in other stories, people who are incapable of giving darshan are also kind of incapable of other aspects of the yoga practice. Like if they're not really good meditators, right? So is darshan an external practice, or is it actually an internal practice? And can you actually give someone darshan if you don't have a meditation practice? Because the external senses, the gross sensory, is so overwhelming that am I really looking? Or is darshan actually a form of meditation? Am I making sense here? Maybe, positively. So I used to think like when I liked this idea of darshan, of seeing, and what I realized is that when I started teaching yoga, I would look at somebody, because this is what my teacher Sharon Gannon would do. She would come into a room and she would put her hands together and she would look at everybody in the room, giving them darshan. Now the question then becomes, is she really giving darshan? Because what's going on in her head? You see what I'm saying? As she's looking at people, is she actually saying, oh, well, there's Austin, and there's Sam, and then there's Sally, and I wonder why Sally's wearing that shirt. Like, if that kind of thing is going on in my head, I can't give you darshan. So to give true darshan, the mind has to be quiet. Because I'm actually seeing you and seeing first the gross body. I'm seeing your emotions, I'm seeing your fears, but then I'm seeing deeper and I'm seeing actually the soul within the body. And that is impossible to happen if I'm not in a meditative state myself. I went to, when the first time I received Guru Darshan was when I went to Amma. How many people have ever been to Amma, the hugging saint? And I was told that before Amma comes into the arena, she spends about 2 hours in meditation. So she goes into this deep meditative state that allows her to actually come in touch with the self. And then she's able to remove her own mental obstruction so that she can give darshan. And thinking about these things, I thought about how we are in this situation now where we're being really confronted with other people's pain and suffering. Both, we're seeing it within Black, brown communities, where Black, brown communities want to tell us about how their lives are and what the situation is and the oppression and the pain and suffering. And what I'm seeing is liberals are able to listen to a point, but then they are not able to really give true darshan. Even yogis, they start to kind of shut down because their mind is thinking, right? They're actually processing and thinking, what is my feelings about what this person is saying? We're seeing, the same thing happen between gender dynamics, where women are telling men what it's like to be a woman, and what they're experiencing, and men are listening, but then kind of shutting down, and nothing, and there's no process being made. You know, we see it also within the, I mean, a perfect example is with the gay and transgender community, where, you know, many gay people shut down when transgender people start to tell them about their experience, right? And so I wanted to talk about, like, ways that we as yogis can use the yoga practice to actually give better darshan to others, and what that actually means for us as yogis. Does that make sense? So let's start over here with Maria. How are you? Purnima, you.
So one understanding I had of darshan, like speaking about ama, was that let's just say that you missed the beginning of it. But just to be in the presence of a saint or holy being meant that you also received darshan, even though she may not be looking at you individually. She sees you as a whole, right? As a creation of souls by the divine. So that to me also is darshan. But I think in talking about a one-on-one situation, for example, when you as a quote unquote yoga teacher, or whoever is in front of you is actually your yoga teacher, right? Let's all agree on that. In that moment in time, right? Because God is speaking to you, you are a soul, you're speaking back to them. And I think the most basic thing is that communication, because the darshan that we encounter every day, that we have to challenge ourselves every day, is the person that we perceive of as different, and radically different, right? We all have that because we've been taught to have limited ways of seeing. So, for example, like what you said, right? There's only so much you can go so far in the journey with them, because if you haven't been on the journey with them, your perception may be blocked. But if you can open yourself, if you have a yoga practice, it teaches you to open up even more and then see beyond your limited perception. And I think that can be very hard, because when you have to go out into the quote unquote streets in public, right? And you may perceive that person as a threat, or you may perceive that person as being on a low energy, and who am I to judge, right? Now, I may not like their behavior, but I still have to see them as holy beings, which again is a hard thing, because those of us in the yoga community can sometimes only like the people in our yoga community, and so we think that's just darshan.
Right.
Darshan is actually being able to face the other beings, to face yourself about things that are uncomfortable and that are really, really hard. And so the things we take for granted, like saying, I'm a yogi, I'm really open, I'm really liberal. Well, what happens if someone from a different lifestyle, right, not may confront you, may be reaching out to you because they're desperate, right? So the thing is that if that stuff in your head is like going on, that buzzing going on, you're not really seeing them. There's no one-to-one going on. And then when people look into your eyes, like I've looked into people's eyes, but they sometimes go, are you staring at me?
Right.
Right? And then there's a natural break, like what you said. Sometimes you have to look away. Sometimes you have to, but um, being in that present moment. So, like for example, this may seem like a weird example. My father ran a bar, and I grew up in a bar. So what happened at that time? My father being, a Filipino, a regular Filipino guy. Now, in the Hawaiian culture, being trans is a lot more accepted, right? I think, in case you don't know that, it is. So
Right.
my father objected to trans women using the women's bathroom because the other women freaked out, right? And so he would force them to use the men's bathroom. And
Right.
that was a law. He said, you've got to make sure they do this. Now, how would I understand that? I'm 5 years old. I'm only supposed to understand that you have to do that, right? But it's really weird to see someone in women's clothing come out of the men's bathroom. So that's just sort of the dichotomy. But because I grew up in the Hawaiian culture around me, I didn't think that was a big thing. But as you said, within the gay community there, like hanging out with my gay friends, I had a friend that told me he used to be repelled by trans people, And he was like, I am solidly gay. You know, I stand for all the issues. I love being gay. But he's like, don't wanna deal. So I was to receive darshan from him because I would at least understand and hear what he's saying, but not get caught up in that, right? And with my father saying what he did, my darshan was to see, and I'll never forget this, that individual being forced to use the men's bathroom. That was darshan for me, even though I'm not looking at them directly.
Right. Yeah, and so I think that that's where I want to go with this too, is that actually giving darshan, you know, when we move away from the idea of guru darshan, when we talk about individual human beings giving darshan, it isn't some kind of like bizarre, like, let me stare them down. It's actually more subtle than that. And that giving darshan actually is connected to the meditation practice, that the mind, like you said, when you said there is all this stuff going on, because the stuff that's going on is you know, Patanjali calls it the vrittis, the chit vrittis, the fluctuations of the mind. And the fluctuations of the mind, when we're talking to somebody and somebody is telling us about their experiences, we're putting value systems onto it, which is literally the word maya. Maya means to put value to or to measure, right? That's another understanding of the word maya in Sanskrit. So we're valuing and we're measuring what the person is saying, and we're going, I agree with that, I don't agree with this, and I don't like this, and I think, well, then maybe they're right. And so you're never really trying to see the person purely and accept the fact that that is their experience, right? And and like I said, I'm witnessing this inability to do that both on the extreme right and on the extreme left within the yoga community. I'm seeing it from both, you know, conservatives and liberals. And actually, to give darshan, you got to be in the middle. Because you actually have to be in the middle because you haven't made a decision about something. You're not putting that measuring value system onto something. And I liked what you said about also like that you were trying to understand the other person's experience and you were kind of looking at it from 2 points of view. One, the point of view of being raised in Hawaiian society and that transgendered people are more accepted. And also kind of like from the point of view of your father, like saying that it's illegal for them to go into the women's bathroom if they, like right now we can't do this. And so, you know, you're kind of caught in this conflict of social norms and then trying to figure it out as a young child by looking and watching the experience they had. So that's a form of true darshan, because you know the two extremes, but at the same time you're trying to evaluate what the person as a holy being or a jiva atman, an individual soul, is actually experiencing, which is compassion, right? That idea of compassion being that it's not sympathy or empathy, thinking that you're superior and you can help out a bit. It's actually seeing that there is this situation that's happening and you are profoundly caring, but you know, you see the two extremes. Narupa.
Actually, it's interesting. Purnima, I really enjoyed hearing what you were saying. And the first word that came to mind, Austin, actually, when Purnima was talking, was empathy. And it was interesting that you said the sympathy versus empathy. I have a couple of things to say. One is, as it concerns the value judgment and the beliefs and the assumptions, and I can only speak for personal experience here, which is I've had a couple of really tough weeks where it feels like a storm in a teacup within. And the
Yeah.
syntax of, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, like, I am not able to hold darshan with myself right now, you know? And at times when I feel, and it's very judgmental, it's very critical, it's very much bringing up a lot of what can you do for me kind of narrative, right? With yourself. Which then makes me always want to change the syntax. Someone always told me, like, you're too focused on the I. So turn the syntax around a little bit, right? And so that value judgment, that system of value judgment and levels of consciousness, the different levels of consciousness, right? That's one. We are doing that to ourselves as well. I'm doing that to myself day in and day out. The second thing that I would like to say is that in the last 2 months, I think I've made a lot of mistakes in my relationships, not because I do not care, especially with anti-racism and especially between interracial relations between friends. And reflecting back on where I started, which was with a very earnest intention to understand, but often not having the language. And when language fails you, I started thinking about what is a better way to kind of be in conversation, and what has come back is really honestly just silence.
Yeah.
And cultivating, when I am in the presence of someone who at that point in time wants to speak, whether they're speaking or not speaking, and I know you don't like the idea of the word holding space, but I'm just saying to literally sit in the oftentimes uncomfortable silences and not having to feel like I need to be discursive, not having to relate my experience to them, because me trying to relate my experience to them is my way of trying to kind of create a bond and an expression of shared humanity. But what I've concluded is that it ends up in sometimes discrediting the other person's experience, because no matter what, you want to try to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. You cannot walk a mile in anyone's shoes. You can only walk a mile in your shoes. And so for me, acceptance of that very basic fact has been profound.
Yeah.
And thank God for the grace of these human beings that have been around me, that have allowed me to fumble and make these mistakes as well. Second, I've concluded that language is extraordinarily divisive regardless. And so I'm really honestly like trying to connect in more sensorial ways, in ways in which language is not divisive. And where language is divisive, I think I have to remind myself that it's to remove the I syntax. Because inadvertently, I find that somewhere there, my mind's going to what isn't it for me? Even when I'm trying to make a connection of my lived experience with someone else, I think the logic behind is what isn't it for me is coming out. You know what I mean? As opposed to what isn't it for you? You know, how can I serve this moment? How can I serve you in this moment? And so to really consciously kind of rethink that. The third thing is on empathy. I've found that the most beautiful ways of holding space and being empathic has been at the energetic level. And I think that's the one thing that the pandemic has taken away, because I literally hug people, not everyone, but there's a very quick, a magnetic exchange almost of energy where you know when someone is okay being hugged and you know when someone is not okay being hugged. And I'm not a yoga instructor, but that exchange of energy oftentimes has transcended so much. It has always come from the spirit of love. It has always come from the spirit of compassion.
Right.
And not being able to engage at that energetic level sometimes with people behind masks, not being able to read the eyes, not being able to read body language, the cues, all of that, I think his kind of has, now we have to find new ways of being with and coexisting even if there's discomfort. And that's all I wanted to say. But I will just say that I'm having the most difficult act of darshan right now with myself. And I think that unsettling also means that when I go out, my energetic field is unsettled. Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm transmitting when I go out. You know what I'm saying?
All right. Well, it's like interesting because you brought up 3 really great key things that I wanted to talk about. The first one, I'm so glad you jumped right into it, because I thought it was really weird to kind of come in here and talk about darshan, which seems very external. I'm watching you, I'm listening to you, and talk about actually that the form of meditation that like Patanjali gives us, and we talked about this last week, in classic yoga psychology, is actually darshan to the self. The small ego is dropped so that actually you can view the self as it truly is. So meditation, if taught in that school of discipline, is darshan. And you are unemotional to the attachment or the judgment of the self. You and then you merge with the self.
Can I say one thing
yes,
there?
Go ahead.
Actually, to that point exactly on meditation, the two things of sitting, like the Buddhists call it, sitting with the emotion and honoring it and allowing it to arise and allowing it to pass through and allowing it to have a voice without, as you said, putting a value judgment on it, without trying to compress it, has been one. And the second thing also on the syntax, where I get lost with the small I immediately have to use a word like source, or like, where I just literally just say, I'm now going to connect to the source. And so the point about what you're saying in terms of the meditation, but the key has been for me to be able to sit with those emotions. And I, similarly with a difficult experience or relationship, let's say that you and I are having a very contentious conversation, the ability to sit and listen to you and not have to resolve the situation by itself is also for me meditative.
Right. Right. And I do want to say, I do want to point out that in classic yoga, different from Buddhist meditation, because they're different, and there's a lot more Buddhist meditation out there than hardcore Vedanta meditation. In Vedanta meditation, you kill the emotions. The key is to get rid of them, to not attach yourself to them, not to even view them as something that you will sit with and allow to. You have to become a witness to it to get rid of it. But the end result, Patanjali is saying to you, and Krishna is saying to you, you're not your emotions. Stop it. Stop. That's all your mind. Your emotions come from your mind. So there is a slight difference in this, and especially this, a lot of meditation that's going on right now with, what is it called? Gratitude meditation and things like this. It's not saying that they're wrong. They're just different schools. And I think that when we look at this idea of darshan, listening, that it's not just visually seeing the being, it's actually listening to them and shutting up. To be quite honest, the person who's giving darshan has to shut up. And when I say shut up, it means that the mind has to stop chattering and getting involved with the feelings and the emotions and the reactions to what the other person is saying. And, what does that actually do for us as yoga practitioners when we're able to turn off the mind and the emotions to actually hear somebody, to actually see them? And I think what you've hit the head on is it creates a more thoughtful, it takes longer to have a reaction, but it's a much more thoughtful reaction to their situation, because you're not immediately responding or feel like you have to have an answer, or you have to like throw in a counter move kind of saying, well, I had this happen to me, and I had the same thing happen. Oh, it was awful. Or, oh, well, I don't think they meant that for it to happen. And, and I think that that's also weird for us in American society where conversation, like talk show hosts, get everybody to react to each other and then tell their personal story, because that makes for good television. That makes for good, that makes for, it keeps the ball rolling. And then over here, we're having something that seems so counterintuitive to do, which is to stop talking, stop thinking, and absorb. Absorb what this other person is saying and their experience, and you're absorbing their energy, which is intense. Tara.
Hello.
Hello.
It's interesting because we're talking about darshan, and the easiest way for me, I think, just to give somebody darshan is to just really be in the breath, like share a breath with somebody, because that will always take you out of the thinking mind. And I find myself wandering just even thinking about the whole idea, right? Like it's taking me out of darshan. It's like, and then sometimes I also notice that I have trouble like receiving darshan, right? Like that's also another thing that, like my mind takes me out, and where am I not willing to receive?
Yes.
I want to, but sometimes I don't. And
can you explain to us like what that actually, I know what you're saying, but
yeah.
Maybe there's somebody else who doesn't understand what that means.
So like my mind gets lost, or I don't feel worthy of receiving it, or, it makes me uncomfortable, because then I have to step up to my own graciousness, my own godliness, right? The own person within me. And like, sometimes that's the frightening thing. And I feel like sometimes, we're talking about the extreme right, the extreme left. It's like, it's easier to attack, and it's easier than to look at yourself and to receive yourself as a holy being. Because if you received yourself as a holy being, you wouldn't be attacking other people, right? Like,
right.
Yeah. So, so sometimes when somebody gives you darshan, it's asking you to let go of your opinions and let go of your thoughts. And sometimes I think of my thoughts and my opinions as my personality, right? And as who I am, and it's not who I am. I mean, it is my personality, but it's not who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I think that, like, we have a hard time with, is that idea that I'm so attached to the thoughts and the personality because that's who I think I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm actually, that giving darshan is actually about not your thoughts and your personality and your
right.
opinions and your political persuasion or your religious persuasion or your gender or your racial identity, that actually to give darshan, that all has to fall away.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think what is very interesting is what you brought up about not being able to receive darshan, which is a totally another concept and idea.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people who are in positions like you are, where you are a yoga teacher, where
Mm-hmm.
your goal is to constantly help. And in Western psychology, it would say you have an enabling personality.
Yes.
Right. I'm an enabler too.
Yep.
And for enabling is a trait of the ego.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's an ego. It's not like crazy narcissist ego, which is like what we always attach to the word egoism. But it's a helper ego. It's an ego that I'm here to help you. I want to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you meet somebody who's actually willing to say, hey, I'm willing to take the time to listen to you and help you, or like, then we actually become like people like you and I, with our personalities, we become intimidated by that and feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
And then we kind of reject the ability to receive darshan because we want to go back to our helper personalities, which we feel more secure in, and in control with.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
that's also a very interesting topic about the ability, because we've been kind of talking about one way darshan, which is I'm
Mm-hmm.
listening to you,
Mm-hmm.
but that two-way darshan
Mm-hmm.
means that I have to be willing to be vulnerable
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to receive it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I find it harder. I find it harder to receive than to give, for sure.
So both receiving and giving is about dropping the ego,
The ego.
the
Yeah.
emotions, the identification of emotions and
Mhm.
feelings and
Mhm.
mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sam, I'm gonna call on you now, up there in the corner.
Hello. I have been thinking a lot about this actually. You brought up the concept of Western philosophy or Western psychology. There's this Western psychological term that I've been thinking of this past week, and it's object permanence. And it's easiest to see in kids, like when you play peekaboo with them. When you cover your face with your hands, you stop existing to the kid. And then you take your hands away, and oh, you're back, peekaboo. So if I don't see it, it doesn't exist. And this is something that I've struggled with for a long time, kind of not realizing it until this past week. And it's this idea that if I don't see a friend of mine regularly or communicate with them, they don't exist. Or family that you spend a long time away from, the relationships you have with them cease having importance. And so when it comes to things like racial inequity or gender identity politics, there's this thing of the straight, cisgendered, wealthy white man who holds power, who doesn't see the problems that other people are experiencing. Therefore, those problems don't exist. So, and then in the personal way of like, this group of people, even right here, doesn't exist for me unless I see it. So to even be present in this group in this way makes you all real to me. Even though I'm looking at a screen right now, I'm not looking at actual people, but you now exist in a way you didn't before. And so when you mentioned at the beginning of, is this an internal experience or an external experience? I think for me, with this thing of thinking about object permanence and what can I see and what is reality, it's a communal experience. We talk about giving and receiving darshan. It goes both ways for me. And so I have to be, what you're saying is that I need to be in a meditative state to give darshan, but I also should be in one to receive it properly as well. And that give and take means that I'm first acknowledging my existence because I'm recognizing my emotions are getting in the way of me perceiving the outside world. But then in order to recognize the outside world, I have to acknowledge that it exists, that there is something beyond me, so then that pulls in the question for me, what is existence? Do things exist outside of me? Or am I the only thing that exists? And I think it's a communal experience where we go back and forth.
Yeah. So what it's so this and Nirupa just said that she loves what you said about the communal experience, and I do too. And I'm going to give you some other insights of why I chose darshan. So you said something at the beginning that we also fall into with an inability to give darshan. So you said, so you have this white man over here. So we've this maleness, gender, wealth, privilege, all these things. and he's seeing, transgender or person of color. Okay. So that statement also implies that that white guy has no problems.
Right.
Which is,
Well,
wait, which is that inability to give darshan, right? So, and the only reason I want to tell you why I came up with this thing this week. So, I started following this Instagram account, and everybody's going to get a big laugh out of it. It's called Karen's Gone Wild. Does everybody know what a Karen is? So a Karen in urban dialect is usually a white woman who is going off at a salesperson because the change was miscounted, and they want to speak to the manager. That's the tagline. I want to speak to the manager.
That is Karen.
So I started following this account, and I have to tell you, about 10% of the videos that I watched, they were absolutely like hysterical, because it was people of privilege having a meltdown over stuff that you thought, I cannot believe that you are actually taking the time out of your day to complain about, your coffee not being the right temperature. However, and there's like 10, 15, 20 videos being posted a day. I would watch these videos, and there were people who were filming it that were saying, yes, Karen, and calling the woman Karen. And I would watch this person, and I would think, this person is mentally unstable. This person is off their medication. This person needs actual intervention. And this isn't a Karen. You see what I'm saying? And it went from me kind of being a voyeuristic and having a chuckle, to me being really, saddened about the abuse of the far left liberal attaching that this person had no problems and they were just being a bitch, to put it bluntly, or kind of within what was, and you would watch these people and you were like, this person is psychologically disturbed. Like one video was a woman who was stopping a man who was an African-American man at a Walmart from checking out. But what she was saying to him had nothing to do with, she wasn't seeing him as black. She was trying to get him to convert to Christianity and accept Jesus. And you listen to her and you thought, this woman's insane. Like she's having a delusional state. And like, even when the manager came over and said, ma'am, I need you to let him check out, she then proceeded to try to convert the white woman who was the manager. And, everybody's kind of laughing at the kind of tragedy that's happening, which is this person there's something profound, there's something wrong, And so, and that's how I kind of came up with this idea, was actually even within the political swirlings that are happening, this idea that we're not seeing the person as a soul and a person that is suffering. We're actually seeing the skin tone. And so skin tone is actually leading us to be overly compassionate and becoming the enabler, which is what Tammy brought up. Or it's actually allowing us to become slightly, what's the word I'm looking for, where you don't really take the person serious. You kind of dismiss them. They're a dismissive tone. And we're not actually practicing as yogis. We're not practicing compassion. So, like with that idea of the white guy who is incapable of giving darshan, what if that white guy is actually just found out that he has prostate cancer, which is only specific to men, because women don't have prostates, right? And all men of color can get prostate cancer. And so maybe his inability to see what you're talking about is actually coming from his own suffering.
Yeah, and
I think Sally wants to say something. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, I've said this in class myself. It's like we can be as angry as we want at Trump, but if you look at it from the perspective of where Trump came from, an abusive, neglectful childhood with a horrible father figure, judge his father as much as you want, and we look at how he was raised to not have the kinds of standards and morals we have, we can understand he's doing the best he can with what he has. And the problem is that he's been given power.
He's been given power. And
so now the consequences of his struggles are resulting in negative consequences for everyone.
For everyone,
so
yeah. There's
this difficulty of feeling compassion for someone whose own inability to perceive or receive darshan is, for whatever reason that may be. You brought up the idea of prostate cancer for men, but this concept that, okay, that's the best you can do. What's the next step then when we have these kinds of negative consequences on a large scale?
Right. So Sally just typed in, and so Sally, explain to me, tell everybody what you typed in and what, because I will respond. I want to respond to it, but I also want you to bring it up because this is typically what is said. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, Nirupa is talking about the difference between labels and how they affect individuals and how they function in a system. We have to do this constant toggling between individuality and a system that enables people. We have to be able to understand that both things are operating all at once. But systems are really powerful, and systems are what we're dealing with right now. So honestly, a system that enables one particular person to express their individual pain, which I might be able to see, but that person can express it in a way that's hideously damaging to other people. It's a system we need to talk about there.
Yeah.
Can I say a couple more things though?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I've been thinking about this a lot anyway, because like Sam, I think about it from the, I start thinking about it from the position of Western psychology. And I think about it from, I don't know if any of you know Winnicott, a theorist of child development, and his whole theory of the mirror moment, where, you're a child and you are merged with your parent, usually your mother, right? And at a certain point, like around the age of 1.5 or 2, like the parent will pick you up and hold you in front of a mirror, and you understand that you're a separate being from the parent, right? And that's the beginning of healthy individuation, right?
Right.
But in order to do that, the parent has to step back, right? The child seeing itself, and the parent has to help that to happen. Mm-hmm. So in my lesbian group, we've been doing a lot of stuff recently about, we're having anti-racism discussions, and it's a big group, and we sometimes we split up into women of color and white women, and sometimes we come together as a whole group. And usually when we do that, we're just like, all the white women step back and shut up for once and let the women of color just talk. And we try to practice this kind of a listening that is about just listen. Don't get all guilty. Don't say that's not me. Don't say I didn't own slaves. Don't right? Don't do that thing that we all do, right? In order to not listen to when someone's telling you about what happened, you know, what their life is like. And it's really hard. And it's a lot of the time people can't do it. White women feel like they have to talk because they can't stand it. And it's really, we've been having this kind of conversation about it in the group, like how difficult it is. Now, to me, right, that is kind of a darshan, although that's not the word I would use, right?
Right.
But
it is a kind of darshan, yes.
It's a hard practice.
It is. So I guess what I think that like where it goes away from, like when it goes into the identity of true darshan, and remember we are attaching ourselves to a Sanskrit term and a yogic term. It's not a Western idea. Is that while we're and we have to be, we're still in the real world. We're still in our world. We're still in our bodies. So we start talking about polarization and political structures and economic structures that are oppressive. And yes, white men have power and authority in those Western systems. In fact, I would say that men have authority and power worldwide in systems. But for yoga and the yogi, for a brief minute, you should be able to, because that compassion that we're talking about is beyond that surface identity. Because when you die, you leave this political structure. That's just the truth. But it's not delegitimizing the experiences of others, but I agree with Sam, and I said to Bobby, I said, the hardest practice for me, because I've embraced, I try so hard to embrace the concept of non-dualism, meaning that God is in everything, is to actually accept that some son of a bitch like Donald Trump or Adolf Hitler still is God. That what they have done is from the ignorance of them seeing themselves as the ego, their whiteness, their maleness, their power, their authority. And that is the most humbling and hardest practice. And I don't tell other people that they have to accept non-dualism the way I have. This is a personal practice, but it really means that I have to let go of my hate on a personal level and actually show compassion to beings that I hate their actions, but I can't hate their soul. I actually have to give them a form of unconditional love because they are connected to the absolute energy, which is God. That's hard. And then we can go about, after I accept that, I can offer them that slight moment, that breath of darshan, then we can go back to the fact that we have to talk about the political abuse of the structural system that they've created. Does that make sense? Sally, no, yes. I think Sally's camera froze up. How about you, Julie? Do you have anything you want to say to this? And I'll read what people have said for a moment.
Well, the way I understand darshan, it's been covered pretty much by everyone, but I really like what you just said in that darshan comes from God, and we come from God, and our way of experiencing real darshan is to just let it flow, is to get out of the way, like everyone's been talking about, with being obsessed with your opinions and your emotions. And it takes a lot of practice and a lot of years of yoga, unless it doesn't, for most people to be able to sit with their spirit and know the difference between that part of us that is beyond the body and mind and the part that is the body and mind, which you've been talking a lot about. And so did, I can't remember who. It's always both, and for me, it's helpful to distinguish the difference and just be able to readily let everything I know go, because I want to experience the divine, and you can't do it when you're in your head. So I think darshan is like, it's part of the oneness. It's the feeling of the oneness, which is God, which is of God.
Yeah, and I think you just hit on, like, you've taken it to the place where I wanted to start to kind of bring this back, that like when we say darshan, we're looking at it from a misunderstanding of that it is my superficial self that is looking, whereas when you said darshan comes from God, I can't actually give darshan. Like, that is a misstatement. Austin can't give darshan.
Except that Austin is also of God. So when Austin is in his godly spirit, he can give darshan from God.
When Austin is connected and is experiencing yoga with oneness with God, and there is no separation, then I am actually able to give and receive darshan. It cannot happen if I'm connected to the personality.
Yeah, you're the vessel.
You're actually empty for it to actually occur. And that is when we talk about colonization, when we talk about appropriation of a term, that is a part of the understanding of the word darshan that doesn't get translated into English, because it's a profound, deep psychology that one has to decide if they're dualistic or they're non-dualistic. And most of us in yoga haven't even figured out that we have a choice to decide if the world is dualistic or non-dualistic. Am I God, or is God over there? And if God is over there, darshan is not something that, and darshan doesn't happen so much in dualistic systems or dualistic philosophies. It only really happens in non-dualistic yoga systems. So but you nailed it on the head with that one line. Darshan comes from God. Mary, do you want to say something? You don't have your camera on, but you may want to speak. Maybe she stepped away.
Can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
I think we live, this is, the constant challenge and the constant practice, because we live on a duality planet, right? And so we're never going to be 100% non-dual or Can you
explain what you mean by that? I mean, why would you say that?
I mean, there is dark and light. There just is. I mean, and you see it through all the deities, and you see it, there's this whole concept of dark and light, and it's like you get to choose, and we have free choice on this planet to be how we want to be. And I mean, if we were all the same, it would be freaking boring, right? Like, it would just be, it's like, but we're here to learn. I mean, it is the only planet, the only place that I feel like, you can have Hitler, and you can have, Mother Teresa, in the same kind of worldly aspect, and you can have evil, and you can have light, and like, we're here to experience it all. Like, and like you said, on a soul level, we're all pure. We all have pure souls, but we're here to work out the personality. We're here to work out the ego. We're here to.
Well, I think one of the satsangs should be, is it a dualistic world or a non-dualistic world? Because
that'd be interesting. Yeah.
Because this is a lot of these things, as I keep practicing, I think a lot of the misconceptions are, and when I say misconceptions, I mean that we're getting two different signals. We're getting mixed messages.
Yeah.
From the teachings, because the teachings come at us from a dualistic point of view or a non-dualistic point of view. And so what you're saying is a dualistic point of view, which is God and evil are separate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually coming from the point of view of saying evil and God are the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God is capable of evil. Oh my God. That are what we're attaching to as evil. That God is actually capable of it himself. There is no devil.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's my belief system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all exists.
Extreme, for me, it's extreme non-dualism. Like, and I had to, and that means that you really have to kind of go through some messy mythology because, and I mean, it actually started with me questioning, from a Christian point of view, if God is all powerful, and God is all pure, then why does God need my effing help to fight the devil?
Right. I don't think that, the demons are within us. That's just us. But
if God is all powerful, why can't he just wipe them away?
Yeah, because that's not the point of God. Like you said, I don't believe that God is separate either. I don't, but I do. But if we have to deal with these dual situations on this earth.
Or are they dual situations?
Yeah. Maybe not.
Or they're just an experience.
Yeah, exactly. We're here to experience it all, the whole gamut of life,
But that's and you actually, is it just even the idea of dark and light? If you can't talk about light without dark.
That's right. That's right.
All you need is sunlight. You would you would go mad. If it's darkness, you go mad.
Yeah.
That's the truth about the physical world. You can't exist in one or the other. You have to. So I think that's an interesting concept, and it's one that can't be answered. I should say.
Right.
If we take that on as a topic, we have to accept at the beginning that topic has been going on for 5,000 years, and nobody would answer for it. But it's interesting to talk about it from schools of thought.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because it's like people are fascinated with darkness, right? Like the evil or whatever, what we perceive evil and want to be good and all this. That's why people, when there's a car accident, people stop and look and they want to see death and what's happening. And, people are obsessed with Trump because just giving him more power, it's an obsession. And it's like, how do we get back to our own center? I agree. It exists within all of us. And we've all probably, if, you believe in incarnation, it's like, I feel like at some point we've all been that at one point in our life. And we all have the capability of possibility of, we've seen it in ourselves, not the purest God and not the, so it's an interesting conversation. Thinking about the polarities. Yeah.
Yeah. Is Sybil still up there, Sam? Or is she typing? Okay. Bobby, do you have anything you want to say?
Just that I can relate very much, and I think most kids can, to Gandhari's putting on the blindfold, because I think most children believe they aren't heard. And that influences them for their entire lives. And I think not only parents, but teachers, other adults, other kids, the problems that arise when we believe that we're not heard. I think that's also why social media is so popular, because everyone wants to be heard. And that creates a lot of noise because it's just overwhelming. So how can how can you be heard, or do you just wait to be heard?
And I think that that desire to be heard, actually are seen, since we're talking about darshan, which is seeing, not hearing. That's comes from the fact that the commonality of being in the body is suffering. That all beings suffer. And darshan comes out of an ability to go into your God form and recognize that suffering and be compassionate to that suffering of any being. And it does mean that one has to drop the small I, ego, an attachment to the ego to actually do it. And, it's kind of thinking about it as a yoga practice. I want people to kind of start to see that it's more, that the idea of darshan is actually more in connection to your meditation practice than it is anything else. It's a moment of profound meditation than it is conversation, and all of the. It's not to stop those other things. It's not to stop the dialogue. It's something totally, entirely different. It's something very special, So I do want to kind of leave on that note of saying that darshan should never be about shutting down the conversation for equality and a just world. But darshan actually should be able to lead us to a point where we can have a more civil conversation. And like I said about the Karens going wild, recognize when it's one thing or the other. Like a difference between somebody just acting out and mental illness, like that, because it becomes heartbreaking to see that people are incapable of seeing mental illness in somebody. What is Sally? Sally, what is? Go ahead. Say what is? Would you like to add something? Okay.
No, I made a comment, and I'm using Sybil's iPad, so I'm chatting under Sybil's name.
Oh, okay.
That's fine.
You want to make do you have a comment to make?
Well, I was thinking about this concept of like and it was kind of brought up when you were discussing the notion of God and the relationship of God to people. And my stepmother, who's a Presbyterian pastor, I thought it was really interesting of her to teach this concept that God comes to us in God's way. So any way that we experience the divine is real and true, which was a really interesting thing to hear from a Christian pastor who, sort of by the design of evangelism in the United States, is supposed to teach that the only way through God is through one path, and that's the sacrifice of Christ. So to hear her say that kind of reaffirms this notion that we've been talking about, that God exists within us, which implies that any way that we experience God is real and valid. And to that point, then the only real evil in the world is the absence of God, or the denial of God, as Sally put it.
Right. Yes, that's an interesting idea too. The only thing that would be absence of God. Yeah, that's interesting. Simone, I don't know if you're there or not. You're the only person who, and I know you're kind of like setting up house at the Cape. Do you want to add anything?
Not really. I mean, this was like a completely new word for me, so I find it interesting just to listen.
Yeah.
But
I hope that, like, you know, does anybody else have anything they want to add?
I just want to remind everyone that we start classes outside on Wednesday at the soccer field near the Beloved School on 500 Grand. And we're starting in the morning. Get there 15 minutes before to set up. Bring your mats, masks, water, sunscreen. And then we're going to see if we want to add more on the weekend or in the evenings, depending on feedback that we get.
Yeah. So the states haven't really okayed us for opening up the studios. I mean, they're like, we thought it'd be mid-July. It seems like there's kind of a pushback, and we've been lumped in with the same category as gyms and fitness centers, where people are talking about people touching equipment and, you know, dumbbells and things like that. So the city reached out to us and said, look, you know, if you go to the parks, you can actually charge and, you know, actually have people use their class packs, and you guys can do that. So we signed up for it. I was resistant at first, only because I'm not ever really crazy about yoga outside and gawkers and all kinds of stuff like that. But going into kind of 4 months of not having people practice is now getting a little overwhelming. I think that I have to kind of surrender and kind of say, this is an act of God. And God, it has something to do with God, and God is wanting me to do something else. So we're going to start doing that. And, you know, like I said, we'll look at, so Catherine and I are going to teach, and it'll just be an hour, because we're here and we're able to get down. We'll look into bring in other other teachers if it works, and if it's something that people want, then we'll start to work it out where other people. But we just kind of, right now, the morning it's an hour class, because also the heat and the sun. I just don't want to have people out like. I thought hour and 15 minutes is too long, because by 9 o'clock it's like brutal, you know. And it's the field is AstroTurf, so it's level, and so you won't have any problems with like unbalanced or uneven dirt underneath your feet. It'll be stable. Okay.
And I'm bringing a PA so that you'll be able to hear Austin and the teachers clearly. So you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So let people know. I think that Bobby posted something. You can repost it. And you know, and so thank you guys. I think this was a really interesting conversation, and I love how everybody, as you guys contributed, you kept building on things I wanted to bring in. But I thought, as I wrote out my list of things I wanted to talk about, seemed a little overwhelming to kind of bring it in at the first. But it shows again that, like, you know, all of you guys are so well versed and well educated in these traditions, and having these hard, difficult conversations is only part of the continuous practice. You know, it only deepens the practice. So let's chant Om, and we will synchronize the sound of Om to the exhale. Om. Thank you guys so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And I will see you guys maybe on Wednesday. Sally, are you going to be there? Come down on your bike. Bye, guys.
Bye.
bye.